Dear viewers, wherever you are, hello and welcome to this new episode of your program, Out of the Box. Last time, we talked about the School of Athens that witnessed the inception of philosophy. And we talked about the very prominent student of the School of Athens, Plato, the student of Socrates. We talked about how he viewed life, how he viewed that there is a superior world of ideals or forms, and under that is a world of concepts, then images, until we reach the physical, tangible world. He also talked to us about a very useful example, which is the allegory of the cave. And he described to us how can we leave that cave and what are the consequences of that. Today, we're still with Plato. But this time, we're talking about the political views of Plato. How does he view human polity? And again, polity, politics, polis, police, actually, again, just like philosophia is a Greek word that became philosophy in English, love of wisdom. Again, politics comes from polis, which is like a city or a formation. It comes from Greek as well. To discuss this topic and discuss in further details the view of Plato, I'm really delighted tonight to be accompanied by Imad Adli Bersoum, who is a prominent writer and a freelance journalist. Imad, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Mohammed. I'm very pleased and honored to be with you today.
The honor is all mine, and really looking forward to this discussion. But before we start the discussion, let's watch with our dear viewers a short report that sheds light on the basic stuff that Plato talked about in his most famous book, The Republic.
The Republic of Plato is the premier and first book in political philosophy. Plato believes that democracy in an ignorant society with little knowledge and awareness always leads to a catastrophe, where the objective vision of governance is absent and chaos and conflicts prevail, which may ultimately lead to resort to strong dictatorial rule in search for safety and stability. Therefore, democracy is only suitable in an educated and enlightened society with a clear vision and goals. The ideal system for Plato is the aristocratic state based on the rule of merit, not the powerful minority that monopolizes the good for itself or the anarchist majority. This ideal system is ruled by a philosopher king, and thus it's grounded in wisdom and reason. The aristocratic state that Plato considered to be the ideal state consisted of three classes. First, the ruling class, made up of the philosopher king, who has been identified as someone who possesses a spirit of gold. Second, assistants to the ruling class, which is made up of soldiers who possess silver souls, and their job is to defend the state and to impose the order that philosophers have placed on the majority. The first two classes of philosopher rulers and soldiers are forbidden from acquiring any private property in order to prevent the policies they establish from being distorted by their personal interests. The third class is the majority of the people, who possess spirits of bronze or iron, who, unlike the first two classes, are allowed to own property and produce goods for themselves and for others. Specialization ensures that these classes remain in constant relationships of power and influence. Rulers control the city and set its laws and goals. The warriors carry out the orders of the rulers, and the producers produce goods while being kept out of political affairs. Plato says that only the philosopher king is allowed to rule, because he alone is capable of realizing the needs of all social classes, and that he is a person who's controlled by reason and justice, and not power or desire. In this ideal aristocratic system, there is a rigorous educational system designed to train intellectuals who are selfless and upright, and whose souls have been pacified. This educational system produces people who are aware of the ultimate good through learning the truth on the basis of Platonic ideas. Each individual is given the maximum level of education according to his abilities and not to his social background. Because the philosopher's son may have limited capabilities, while the worker's son might be a genius. Therefore, it is not fair for the philosopher's son with limited capabilities to be honored and given more than he deserves, just because of his father's history. And it's not fair as well for the son of the intelligent worker to be given less than he deserves, just because his father was a worker.
Dear viewers, after watching the report that shed light on the Republic, we're back again with the discussion about the Republic of Plato. First and foremost, before we go into any details, Ivan, to what extent do you agree with the general analysis of Plato? He talked about a society that is made of three levels. So we have the philosopher king or ruler, then we have the guardians or like the guards, the military, and under that we have the commoners or the workers. To what extent do you agree with this hierarchy? And again, we're not going to depth yet, just a general idea.
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, what Plato stated in his hierarchy is not something that was unique for his ideas, because this kind of hierarchy existed already at that time in the Egyptian state, at that time the ancient Egyptian state, where they had three levels as well of people or system. They had the pharaoh on the top, and after that they had the priests of the temples, his army, and the philosophers, and at the bottom were everybody else. So the idea itself is not unique. I assume that maybe he took it from the neighbor country at that time, which Egypt, but he designed it in a different way to serve his theory of the Republic, which is ideal theory in itself. So first we said it's not a new idea as I see it. And second, it is a very ideal theory or ideal thought. Sometimes I see it as too good to be true. Because
okay.
Sorry?
Yeah, too good to be true. Yeah, you're saying.
Yeah. So many things are too good to be true. Sometimes because he himself was idealist in all his thoughts and ideas, and we can see that from his writings. And maybe at that time, he was looking for something unique, beautifully, and also politically stable in the midst of turmoils around him everywhere, political turmoils, wars, and unrest in every country. So that's why he was trying to bring to us the theory of the ideal place or city, and that's why it's called the just city as well.
Well, absolutely. Like, you said, it's like this system is not a brand new system. It was applied in several cultures before. So there was a hierarchy in ancient China, in ancient Mesopotamia, in ancient Egypt, and to go to your specific example, like in ancient Egypt, there were even two different languages spoken simultaneously.
Yes.
So there were the rulers used the hieroglyphics, but there was the Demotic language, which is the language of the commoners. And in some historical context, and of course history is is always very controversial. At some periods, Hebrew was spoken as well as one of the language of the commoners or the servants. Again, this is very debatable. Is this true or not? That's a different story. But there is a different hierarchy. But do you think, like, according to Plato here, he places him, because he is a philosopher, okay?
Yes.
So, and he said that the philosophers should be at the very top. Do you think that, from your own perspective, do you think that this makes sense, or was this a very selfish point of view of Plato? Like, he wants to put himself as the one on the very top of a hierarchy?
I would see it actually as very prejudiced to his kind, or prejudiced to his group of people who think themselves they are smarter and better thinkers than others around them. But I disagree, of course, of this, because philosophers, although they are great thinkers, yes, but they lack many other qualities which we need them to rule. For instance, the military techniques or the military trainings at that time, especially that era. Second, also, they have to have a good kind of insight in politics, real politics, not one that was drawn by Plato himself. Politics, negotiations with enemies, or negotiation with other allies as well. So to be on the top of hierarchy, you have to have lots of qualities that might not be present in a philosopher.
So you said a philosopher is a smart person. He has he has insight, but an incomplete insight, because he's not good to be a statesman. So
statesman,
Sorry,
statesman. Also, as we say it in our slang language, he has to be street smart.
Yeah.
But philosophers are mostly academic. So to have academic person on the top of hierarchy of a regime, sometimes, of course, most of the time, is not the right choice for that.
Now, another thing that might ring a bell, actually, in many cultures and in many countries throughout history, is the second class, which is the military. So he put the military, according to him, he's putting the power of the mind, then the muscle, and then the instinct at the very bottom. So, like, it's the mind is the philosopher, the muscle, the will or the energy is found, or the people have the stamina, to do things, and
yes,
the momentum, they are the soldiers. And then finally, we have the instinct, or the basic instinct, which are the tradesmen. Do you agree again with putting soldiers or the army on the second level of this hierarchy?
Actually, this was very intriguing, because he is using the military power or the armed force to put it on top of the people. So in itself, this is kind of a dictatorship, or a kind of, how we say it, trying to suppress the people. So I believe that a military force should not be on top of any other level. It could be outside the hierarchy. Hierarchy might have the top, the rulers. In the middle, you have maybe scientists, philosophers, thinkers, and at the bottom, the majority of the people. Armed forces should be excluded out of this equation, because they should be always non-prejudiced. They are always non-biased to the people. They have to protect the country from the outside and the inside. But to put them on top of other class of people, that definitely kind of suppression. And it is always something that has been used throughout the history.
Absolutely.
Even the philosophers, the great thinkers, as we think, they use the power to suppress any kind of oppressed or any kind of resistance or revolting against them as well.
So is it just to say that what Plato's calling for is a wise dictator, or a wise, I wouldn't say a tyrant, but a wise despot, a wise hegemon, like someone who is very omnipotent, but he's wise, he's good. So he does not trust the will of the masses. He does not trust the intellect or the proper judgment of the masses. So
Indeed.
is that fair to say that he's looking for the good dictator or the...
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. He's a dictator coated with sugar coated
Okay.
dictator. Or sometimes it's, as we said again, too good to be true. So, or as we always say, good from far, far from good.
Okay, absolutely, absolutely. And then the third, group that he put, the third level in society,
Yeah.
he put in the third social class all the tradesmen and all the workers. Do you think that is fair? Like in modern times, people tend to make it like more stratified. There are more social classes or more structures than that. Do you agree in putting everybody else? So you have the philosopher king. So he is a solo. He's the sole king. He's one and only. He's just unique. Under that, you have the soldiers who possess the power, and then last is everybody else. Do you think that's fair, or that's also a very like elitist? I don't want to say like. Is there like a sort of an elitist arrogance there?
Yes, of course. I still agree with you on that point as well, because I see it as a very radical thought, or a very suppressive thought again. He does not want them to rise to the top or the middle. He wants to keep them all at the same level. Although among this level, you find lots of variants as well. Various trades, various approaches, various minds.
Absolutely.
You can see engineers in this level, and also you can see thieves in this level. So we cannot have them both in the same level. You have lawyers, accountants, doctors, physicians, all this in the same level with some criminals and thieves and thugs. Of course, that's unfair. So, but by doing this, you want to put everybody else in one basket, and that's against any liberal thoughts or even socially positive approach.
And do you think his analysis when he says that the soul of a philosopher is made of gold, while the souls of the soldiers is made of silver, but the souls of the commoners, the mob, the masses, is just made of either, like copper or it's made of iron. So
it should be the opposite. It should be the other way around. The mass of the people are the gold. Because without the mass, there will be no society, no civilization. Those who are the farmers, the handcraft makers, the doctors, whoever provide a service to the community or to society is the gold of the society. That's what they need to be. And again, I don't care about the other two levels, whether the silver or the gold should be related to any kind of precious metal. It could be just a normal without any precious description. Army, yes, it's their job to protect everybody. And they should not be differentiated by being silver or gold or diamond, because it's a duty. And of course, the philosophers, again, Plato is trying to distinct himself or the people like him into a different category, superior to everybody. That's why he made his soul made of gold.
So
it's a kind of superiority again.
How about that? Like he's stating a form of compensation by saying, okay, although we are the top, like I'm made of gold, I'm the philosopher king, and then we have this, army or military, they come second, but we are not allowed to have any private property. While a compensation for the commoners who are lower in status, but they can acquire property. And this is a form of like what we call in modern times checks and balances between the different, so today, for example, we have the executive power, the legislative power, the judiciary, and there are checks and balances between them in a democracy. So
Right.
is that enough? Is that enough to deprive the rulers and the military from acquiring private property? And a follow-up question for sure: can that really happen? Like, is he assuming the soldiers and the rulers to be like angels?
Well, that's actually what you are talking about now is reflecting the two extreme sides of political regimes, which is socialism and capitalism. So, but he is mixing them actually in a very weird way. Again, it's too good to be true philosophy, because yes, you might deprive the military and the philosophers from acquiring property to keep them clean from the inside without any demands or personal ambition, looking for to accumulate wealth. But that does not keep them from the idea itself of acquiring something, and that would lead to corruption. Because if he is not going to give his generals some property, then the generals might use their power to steal property from others or to steal what they don't have to own. So he is
Yeah.
forcing them to that.
And
However,
yeah,
sorry, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. Please, no, go, carry on, please.
I'm sorry.
Carry on, please continue.
Yeah. No. Okay, so I'm saying that it is not right to have such a kind of approach to deprive certain class from the ownership. Even though if we apply this to a social society, still social society, everybody has to own something at least. At least they can own where they sleep. And in a social society, you don't have the bottom of the pyramid owns everything, because this bottom of the pyramid have, again, some people might not be able to manage the wealth. Because to manage wealth, you need some educated and well-trained people to do that. So this kind of distribution of wealth, according to Plato, is totally unfair and totally not logical as well. It can be logical, in my opinion.
Yeah, I see what you're trying to say here, because like what sustains a society is economy as well. So like how will a philosopher king or a ruler or like the army make ends meet? Like how will they earn their bread? So he might be suggesting that, okay, the philosopher or the army, they would get a specific wage without being involved in labor. They might get that wage from people maybe in the form of taxes.
Yes, taxes, of course. Yes.
Taxes. So like getting some taxes, but they will not be involved in a like a standard 9-to-5 job, or they will not be treated as serfs or peasants.
But Muhammad, according to the video you have seen, it shows that the middle level of the hierarchy, the army and military, they are not allowed to own property. It's
Absolutely.
not about wages only.
Yeah.
If it's about wages, yes, of course, they get paid from the taxes collected from the people, from the third level. But to own is something completely different. I might make lots of money as an income from you, but I cannot own even my own house. Mm-hmm. That's a little bit contradicting here with
his argument here is that he says, in order not to blind their judgment, like he wants their judgment to be free from any distortion. So he thinks that ownership might distort their decisions.
Now he is depriving a human nature from expressing its will to own and to be part of a group of people who might own land, maybe a horse at that time, or maybe a boat, something like that. So it is, again, against the nature of mankind. Mankind, from the beginning of the civilizations, even before that, they used to own land, own their animals, own their tools to hunt with it. So the ownership is in mankind is like an instinct, maybe, or part of their daily needs, like all their needs as well. So to deprive this group of people in the hierarchy from owning something, that's not fair.
Yeah, like there are a lot of echoes there. Really, like you can feel sort of an extreme communist background there. Like he did not say, bourgeoisie, or he did not say the proletariat, but it is like that. So the petty bourgeoisie, they are the owners of the tools or the means of production, and the serfs, they don't own that. So we want to cancel the private property, and you own what you work in. So if I'm working in a factory, I'm an owner. If I work in the land, I'm an owner. And these ideas were later on introduced, but here Plato talks about democracy, and he has such a very negative view of democracy, because he says that, in other words, really, he's calling for an oligarchy, or a rule of the few, of the select few. There are some elites up there, and because he's saying that democracy will never work well in, I wouldn't say an ignorant society, but a society that is not fully enlightened, a society that does not have the ability to create a clear vision, like a society that is not highly educated, or does not have profound understanding of matters of life. To what extent do you agree to that? Like, is democracy only good for some societies, but it's bad for others?
You're asking a very tricky thing now, because according to my belief, no, democracy is not a dangerous thing. It's only when to introduce it. It's only a time. When are you going to introduce democracy, and how it would work? But I do agree with him partially one thing, that democracy should not be given to, I wouldn't say illiterate people, but people who have no experience with democracy or freedom. So you have to introduce it slowly. You cannot give them everything at the full time. Like a child, you cannot teach him something from high school at the age of 5 or 6.
So in a gradual sense, you would not...
Gradual sense, yes. You have to train them. But in order to do so, you have to have a regime or a government that is really keen to transfer its society from being ignorant about democracy to a democratic level, without abusing their life, without being dictators. So it has to be very true, honest government.
But will this ever happen? like in reality, will this ever happen?
Well, it happened in some. It happened in some places. Yes, I would say that the northwest European countries, excluding
Scandinavia, like in Scandinavia,
Scandinavians mainly, yes, they have achieved this equation, and actually they will be envied for that, because they have crossed all the lines of theories of this dilemma of not how to apply the democracy right. They did it, and they did it in a social environment as well. And there are still no illiteracy there, and no literacy and no dictatorship for a long time since the World War II. They have succeeded in that. But if we go back again to Plato for a second, Plato, when he wants to say that democracy is not for the people, that's true. That's not true. So I'm sorry, that's wrong. That cannot be that, because we have to introduce it slowly. And I would like to mention to you a very small story that I have heard that happened in China in the 70s, where my father was there visiting at that time. And they took him to a theater, opera theater in Beijing. When he entered the theater, he found that the seats are made of wood, very hard and very uncomfortable seats. So my father asked them a question: how come you have such an opera house with great musicians and singers, but yet you have the people sitting on wooden chairs? So the answer was as follows: they have to be grateful first that they have a theater to attend, and slowly we will introduce to them the comfortable seats. So we cannot take them from no art at all to a very comfortable environment. Whether we agree or disagree with this theory, but yet everything has to be introduced slowly, so the human mind can accept it and can use it for its future, its benefit.
Because here Plato argues that, people would, in a democracy, it would result in chaos. Like there would be loss of control of everything. And eventually, people would resort to dictatorship to run away from. So he says, like, there is like oligarchy, or like the rule of the nobles, let's say, and then people might revolt against it. So resulting in a democracy, but democracy is chaos. There is no discipline at all, and then they would resort finally to dictatorship. But from history, really, again, it is extremely rare that anyone would willingly give up power.
Yes.
And that is why it is quite impossible, with the exception of very few cases. And actually, exceptions assert and confirm the correctness of a rule. So the rule is no one gives power willingly. For you to have democracy and freedom, you have to snatch it. You have to fight for it. If it happened in like countries in like Scandinavian countries, well, that's an anomaly. That's an enigma. That's something out of the usual.
Out of the norm, yes.
Out of the norm, exactly. But normally, no one will give up power.
Absolutely.
So, which means that if we want to wait until people are educated enough, which is something that dictators will never do. Dictators would never, ever educate the people, would never empower the people, would never enrich the people. So, like, there is the evil triangle of ignorance, of disease, and of poverty. These are the three things that always a dictator would try and do. So if we want to wait for people to be enlightened, informed, for people to live, because for you to think about things, you must have, leisure time. And to get leisure time, you must have a good economy, and so on. So it's a very vicious circle, very vicious cycle here. So if we wait for these prerequisites, for people to be educated, have good health, have good economy, we'll just wait forever.
That's why I said at the beginning of when you asked me about this, I said it requires a very fair and unprejudiced government or regime. It requires the extreme democracy from the government itself, or the extreme care about its people.
But my question is, will this ever come? Like it's like the chicken or the egg,
Yes.
For you to have democracy, you need people to be like educated, prepared, understanding things,
yes.
Ready in a gradual manner. But again, for you to have people to be well educated, to be well off, you need a democracy. So which comes before the other?
No, but first of all, I will ask you something, Mohammed, now. Are you saying that this is impossible? Because you are putting an obstacle here, right?
From my understanding, I would say like history tells us that democracy is never given. Like it never ever happens. It does happen, but again, in very rare occasions. Like it happens rarely. But the norm, the usual thing is that dictators or people in power would never ever give up the power unless they are forced to, unless they're toppled.
Or we can put it in a different form. Let's say that democracy is achievable, yes, but after lots of bloodshed and dictatorship. So a society has to pass through lots of ordeals in suppression, dictatorship, discrimination, until they reach this level of democracy. That means it is attainable, yes, but it has a price, and a hefty price. And we can see this in the French Revolution, for instance.
Yeah.
The French Revolution, since start in 1793, until the last monarchy in 1870s, 100 years, they have seen 6 republics and 6 monarchies between. So it was monarchy, republic, and between lots of bloodshed, lots of dictatorship. An emperor thinks he owns France and its people. Then comes a republic who would kill all those who are following the emperor. So, yes.
But you know, the French example here. So like, people revolted against the king and queen, who are like extreme, dictators, extreme tyrants, and living in a different planet altogether, really not feeling anything of the masses, favoring the nobles, etc., etc. And then they lost their heads with a guillotine. They had their heads cut off. And but the fuel of the revolution, again, came from people like Victor Hugo, for example, like some French writers. So the story of Les Miserables, for example, is one of the stories that triggered
the Hunchback of Notre Dame, even.
Exactly.
Yes, all these novels and plays, they gave the first ideas about revolting against the dictatorship of a monarchy.
Exactly. So again, so here you can say that you had a philosopher fueling democracy. So,
but those who revolted and achieved the revolution, they themselves killed each other.
Absolutely. And then we had Napoleon, the dictator,
and they were very intellectual, by the way. Yeah. Mirabeau and Mara, they were all journalists, writers, poets, and they killed each other, which is very ironic, actually. But this confirms what you said earlier, that once you are in power, it's very hard to give it up. And you might tend to get rid or eliminate all your peers who might contradict you one day and tell you you're wrong. And that's what they did.
Okay,
so maybe Plato was right.
Last but not least here,
yes.
How can we see any resemblance or reflect this on the modern times? So since the since the middle of the 20th century, we have seen many revolutions and so on and so forth, but since the middle of the 20th century, there was a very big tide of revolutions and calls for freedom, independence, exactly, in the third world, like getting rid of the imperialism and so on and so forth. We've seen these happen in Latin America. We've seen it happen in Africa, in Asia, etc., etc. And then later on, we've seen revolutions against regimes. So there was like people who wanted to kick out the invaders or imperialism from foreign powers, but we witnessed a lot of coups d'etats as well. We witnessed a lot of regimes being toppled. That, like, for instance, we've seen in 1979, like the Shah being toppled, and then the Ayatollahs took power in Iran. We've seen in the 1990s with the fall of the Wall of Berlin, when the President Reagan called on Mikhail Gorbachev and told him, "Mr. Gorbachev, please bring down that wall." And then we had a big tide of changes in Europe. We've seen someone like Nicolae Ceausescu, the Romanian dictator, disappear. He was removed, and etc., etc. And then very recently, in the last decade, we've seen a lot of things like that in the Middle East. To what extent do you see any resemblance at all between what happened in the 50s of the 20th century until the first decade of the 21st century? Is there any connection between what Plato's saying and what really happened?
First, we have to look at it from a different view. First of all, we would say that it's all humans connected, human behavior connected. Humans are humans. through the history. And whatever they did 3,000 years or 2,000 years ago, they are still doing it, but in a different form. So Plato was afraid, or he maybe have seen the future. He was afraid that once you give some democracy to the people, they might abuse it and create chaos. But the same thing is the opposite. The opposite is that what if you give them the stability, but within a very corrupted regime, and that lasts for a long time? And I will go and put some emphasis on the Middle Eastern countries, and especially the Arab Spring. Those systems that have fallen during the Arab Spring were against a regime that lasted for 30, 40 years. And of course, in any kind of modern democracy, if we call it democracy, it's not right to have a regime which is called a republic, not a monarchy, to last for such a long time. Because when you stay in the regime for such a long time, everything gets rotten. I'm using this word because, yeah, it's an old, rotten, and no modernization, no new blood to change or to cope with the changes that happens around in the world. So people would reach a certain point, they have to revolt against it. Especially with it's again, people are not children. The public are not children. You cannot give them such a speech and then tell them to listen to it like a child. At a certain point, they realize that what you give them is not the right thing. They need more and more education, healthcare. They need more modernization of their life and jobs. But if you don't give them any of these, they must revolt. They must say, stop it now. Your regime is obsolete. You have to get out, and we will get a new one, a new system that will think better. Although, even though they revolted, but they didn't bring this dream regime or dream president. They brought another systems that might not achieve anything for them as well. Or maybe they brought radical systems.
I'm sorry to interrupt here, but so you're sort of seeing eye to eye with Plato here, because those people were ruled by a dictatorship or tyranny that sort of lingered. They just lingered in power, and they stayed like, it seemed like an infinite rule, really. And it transformed from a republic that's supposed to, you're supposed to rule for like one period or two periods with a maximum of 10 years maybe, but some of them stayed for 30 or 40 years. And inheritance was in the picture. So it's not only me, it will be my son as well after.
It was again pouring some fuel on the fire.
Absolutely. And in many cases, the children of the president were the de facto rulers, really. They were the actual rulers. Like, they did not have the title, but they were the de facto rulers, and they were eventually going to become the real rulers of the country. So people were sick and tired of this, of unfair treatment and so on, and they went to revolt. They took to the streets and revolted, and they toppled. But what many people would argue, they only toppled the head of the regime and not the regime. The regime was still there. So, and that is why maybe again, like something like the French Revolution, which eventually succeeded after a lot of bloodshed, after a lot of atrocities, after a lot of chaos, but eventually it succeeded in giving the world one of its leading democracies.
After 100 years.
Yeah, exactly. And
100 years.
Even in North America, like, countries like, United States and Canada, again, France was always seen as a role model.
Yes.
Of democracy. So, so maybe the French Revolution, many people would argue that getting rid of the king is only the tip of the iceberg. You just got rid of the tip of the iceberg, but you really have to go deeper into the crypts of the state, and this takes a very lengthy it's a very lengthy and a very hard process. So,
because
yeah.
Yeah. So for a system to last for 30 or 40 years, it has to have very, very rooted in the ground foundations. In order to survive all that time without any shaking or any this instability, they are into the octopus in every corner of the society or the country. They have their arms rooted in it. So, as you said, if you cut only the head of the iceberg or the head of the top of the mountain, but the roots are there, and maybe they will hibernate for a little bit of time and they will come to the surface again. They will use new names, new slogans, and maybe new faces to introduce, but still, the old regime will be there as well, which focus only on the benefit of its members. And it's not a regime that would look after the benefit of the whole society, or to sacrifice for them. They only focus on how to increase and build their wealth again.
So eventually they might succeed, but it takes a long time.
It will take a long time. And as we said, if it took the French Revolution 100 years to stabilize and give the world the model of a revolution against monarchies, I don't know how long it will take in Middle Eastern countries. It might take another 20 years, 30 years, and it might not happen at all.
Because, the French Revolution, again, was a major factor that induced really the creation of what is known today as constitutional monarchies. Because most of the monarchs of Europe were afraid of facing the same destiny as the French king and queen. So they said, you know what? Okay. You know what? I will own but not rule. Like, I'll be just a symbol, but and we'll create a constitutional monarchy. Here, in Plato's, just to finish off here, but it's a very important point, really. He talked about in his ideal republic, and he calls it a republic, but it has a king. That's the interesting part. So he calls it a republic. He calls his state a republic, but it has a philosopher king.
Which is the constitutional monarchies now, as we know.
Exactly. But in a constitutional monarchy, the king does not rule. The prime minister would be the one who takes care of the policies. The king or queen are just a symbol.
Yes. Or a chancellor. Yes.
So he's actually mixing many different things together, like a bit of this, a bit of that. But he says in his republic, there is a very rigorous educational system that is based on merit and not on inheritance. So whoever is worthy of being educated, they will get the maximum that they deserve, but it's not based on inheritance. So it's not good enough that your father was a genius for you to be a genius. No, these things are not inherited. And if your father was just a layman, you can still be a genius.
And
to what extent is this idea useful?
Okay, and actually you got to the best part of what we have seen earlier, because I have learned this one thing from Plato's theory of republic and all what he talked about. The only positive thing I see, and I would apply it through the history, is that education has to be given to those who would need it or want it and are capable to handle it and grow up with it. So what he said about this, that it's not a merit for the royals or whatever connected to the higher hierarchy, but for those who deserves it and those who would be able to carry it and go further with it. So 100% Plato in that part, he was a philosopher, a real philosopher. That's what makes him a philosopher, education, and to who deserves it. Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. And although we came to the end here, but I really want to thank you very much for being with us tonight, Ayman. And it's been a pleasure, and really looking forward to having you many times again in this program.
Thank you. It is always a pleasure to be with you, Muhammad, and to share with you this great knowledge and to learn from you as well. Lots of new things, and we can exchange ideas all for the benefit of everybody, so everybody can learn from that.
I'm extremely humbled by your like your words, but it's always a mutual benefit, and we all learn from each other.
And the only thing that I believe in so much is that knowledge, whatever you have it, I have it, it's not our possession. It belongs to everybody.
Absolutely, absolutely, I totally agree. And dear viewers, just to conclude here, you know, Plato was talking to us in the first episode. We talked about the different levels of being, or the different levels of existence. And today we talked about the different levels of government. But definitely, if we would come up with something, or come out with something here, is again, really, it's education. It's education. Because you can see as much as you know. I will not be concerned with something I don't know. And humans are always the enemies of the unknown. We always hate things that we do not know. And that's why we hate darkness. Darkness itself is not bad, because we want darkness to sleep. We enjoy darkness to sleep, and gives us sort of serenity. But the real reason we hate darkness is that we cannot know where we're going. We are unaware. So a person who is not well enlightened is also a very fertile ground for being brainwashed, for all sorts of terrorism, all sorts of prejudice, all sorts of bigotry, all sorts of stigma. So education, really, education is the key. And a dictator will never succeed in an educated society. And that's why always a dictator would make sure that his public are ignorant as much as possible. Ignorance makes you very easy to be ruled. Ignorance would make you have a weak health. Ignorance will usually make you poor, with few exceptions. So the key to dictatorship is ignorance. The key to freedom, and successful freedom and liberty, is education. So let's really watch out for this, and let's take good care of education and enlightenment. At the end, dear viewers, thank you very much for being with us as usual. Until we meet next time, take good care.